The opening of your book or your story is obviously important to get right. So let's take a look at some of the most common mistakes I spot right at the beginning of a story and how I think you can smooth them over. By the end of this video, you'll know if you can make your story opening a bit better, and you'll have some ideas about how to do that. If you're new here, I'm Kieran. I'm a writer and a freelance editor, and I love to help writers tell their stories while having fun, so thanks for being here. So, I look at a lot of openings. Let me rephrase. As an editor, I'm used to assessing the opening lines of writers' stories. There it is. I spend a lot of time giving suggestions on what to include and what to take out in order to hook readers or set things up and to make an overall interesting start. I've definitely been able to spot some patterns. So let's start with an example of a mistake that I see fairly often. This isn't real client work, by the way. It's just something I've made up to demonstrate. The rain was torrential. It beat down on the hills with unrelenting force, cascading down slopes and collecting in the valley below, filling every gap and crevice in the mountain. For as far as the eye can see, grey clouds hung over the landscape, the promise of misery to come. Crichton and his men stood sheltered beneath a rocky outcrop, watching any chance of their escape wash away. Alright, not actually a bad start necessarily, but I think it can be made better. So, you've probably heard the old advice, don't start your story with the weather, but it's not quite that simple, I don't think. Starting with the weather can be fine, but I just redefine the advice slightly by saying don't start your story with the weather alone. Stories are about people, I always say that, so shifting the focus here from the weather to those who experience it, I think might pull the reader in a little bit sooner. They are there, but they're in the third sentence, so I think we can mix the weather and the people together here and make something that includes both of them from the off, so here's what I might do instead. Crichton and his men huddled beneath a rocky outcrop, shivering as a torrential rain drowned their hopes of escape. As far as he could see, slate-grey clouds smothered the hills, a grim promise of more misery before nightfall. Okay, so firstly, I've moved the section Crichton and his men up and formed a new sentence based around them, incorporating some of those weather details from the first sentence so we're not losing that atmosphere. I wanted to make the people more of a focus in the first sentence, so I've also given an idea of how they might be feeling. Finally, I added that scale back in with the clouds and hills, but I also added in a hint of an open question here with before nightfall. What I wanted to do here was tie in with the hopes of escape bit to form the beginnings of a story. Will they make it out in time? Is it perfect? No. No writing ever is. I think it's more concise, but you may have preferred it the old way, and that's fine. The point here isn't to write something objectively perfect, because that's impossible. The idea is to just get us thinking a little more about what we want to show our reader and whether we've managed to do that. So you can start with the weather, but I'd recommend getting a character in there as well. I think it's more engaging that way. Weather brings atmosphere, but people bring situations. I think it takes both to make a good story. The next example isn't actually inspired by my editing work. It's my own writing work from a good few years ago. Without any context, here's the opening to one of my old novels. What a terrible mistake this might have been. The worst of it was, he thought, if all went to plan, he'd never know. The main issue with this, as I'm sure you've spotted, is that it makes you go, what? It's totally vague and impossible to understand. It tells us nothing about the story. If you're wondering how I ever settled on this as a first line, I think I know how I got here. I know what my mistake was. Maybe you can spot it already. I wrote this first line as part of a second draft that never got off the ground, and I knew too much about my story here. I was writing the first line as an insider, someone who knew where everything in my story was leading, so this made total sense to me because I already had all the context. What I failed to consider was that readers don't have that. So to write our first line then, the only reasonable thing for a writer to do is instantly forget absolutely everything that we know about our story. If you need to, bang your head on the desk a few times repeatedly until it's all Alright, obviously don't do that. We can't forget our own story, it's impossible. But more realistically, we can at least try to take nothing for granted and view the story as a reader would, as much as possible. I don't really think there's a way to improve this particular line, as there's not enough substance there to reshape and salvage and form into something else. If I was reworking this, I'd just start a new opening entirely. The thing to take away from this one is to remember that you're writing for a reader who knows nothing about your story. You don't have to spell everything out with little brightly coloured blocks with letters of the alphabet on them, but it does need to be at least sort of accessible. Speaking of making things accessible, did you know you can hire me to take a look over your short fiction or your novel extract? I always keep my feedback positive and constructive, whether you're a first-time writer or a seasoned pro. I also have a Patreon account where I share my own short fiction for free, and I have a load of other content about the craft of writing, including custom video requests, my old novels, good and bad, and my work in progress. If you're interested, check out both at the links below. I've got one more example of an opening line error to show you. This is another one that I see fairly regularly. How to describe this one. Have you ever had a little kid show you their favourite toy or their favourite food, and they don't hold it like this, like nicely so you can see it. They hold it like this, right in front of your face, and they move it around so you can't even really focus on it or tell what the hell it is. It's actually possible for us to make this same error with our story opening, going way too close, way too fast. Let's take a look at an opening that I think suffers from this issue. Hopefully you'll see what I mean. I couldn't move my arms. The world was upside down. I could feel blood soaking my clothes as fire rained down all around me. The freezing cold earth beneath me began to fall away, taking me with it. See what I mean? It feels like we're right up close to whatever the hell's going on here. So close we can't focus on it and figure out what we're actually looking at. We're zoomed right into the micro shot, and we haven't had the macro shot yet, so it's really hard to form a picture and to understand what's happening. This can work if you focus on some very small details and then quickly open the picture up, but too many details like this, too fast, too close, it's just all a blur. So how do we fix it? The answer, again, is context. We need to zoom out and see these details together with more of their surroundings so that we can make some sense of them. I just made up all of those details, by the way, as I was writing this video. I didn't have a particular scene in mind as an end goal because I wanted things to seem as disconnected as possible. But I think we can still pull them all together using the power of context. There were signs. No birds in the sky all day. The dogs barked long into the night. Then there was quiet. The vast open sky beyond the old peak. The next time I saw that same sky, it was burning. I snapped awake, pinned beneath debris, sprawled in the snow outside what had been our cabin. At first I thought I was looking down from some great height as fireballs arced overhead. I couldn't make sense of it. Blood pooled beneath me. Warm at first, then cooling as it met the snow. Everything began to slip away. The mountain itself was waking, cracking open along its shoulders to unleash fire and ash, to swallow all I'd ever known. All very dramatic and not the best writing in the world, clearly. But hopefully what it demonstrates is that with context, everything makes a bit more sense. All those details sort of came together to make something volcano-y, so I followed that. It's still a bit confusing and not the most effective opening, I don't think, but it's a bit clearer now. I still used all the same details, but because we've taken a bit of a step back, it's easier to picture all of them. There's plenty more work you could do to this, obviously, but I think it serves as an example. And the one thing all these examples have in common is that they bring clarity. They all help a reader to understand what they're seeing a bit more quickly, and that's vital, I think, if we're looking to engage them anyway and hook them into what we've written. If you're feeling like you want to take a stab at an opening line now, or maybe rework your current opening, here's a video where I talk you through doing exactly that and practice it along with you. Thank you so much for watching, as always, and happy writing.